Hana walked through the metal corridors of Kepler Station and felt every eye watching her. The other cadets moved away when she passed, not in a mean way, but like they were scared of something they did not understand. She was small compared to most of them, barely reaching the chest of the tall blue aliens from HFY, but they still stepped aside. Her boots made soft sounds on the deck plates as she carried her single bag toward the dormitory section. The bag held everything she owned now that she had left Earth behind: 3 changes of academy uniform, some personal items, and a photo of her family back in Seoul. Her parents had been proud when she got accepted to the Galactic Defense Academy, but they had also been worried. Earth was still new to the Galactic. Community and humans were still proving themselves worthy of trust. The corridor opened into a wide common area where dozens of alien species sat in groups. Hana recognized some from her orientation materials, but others were completely new to her. There were the insect-like beings from the hive worlds with their clicking mandibles and compound eyes. The reptilian Belthari sat in a corner, their scaled skin catching the light from the overhead panels. Near the viewing ports, a group of tentacled creatures from the water worlds discussed something in their musical language. All conversation stopped when she entered the room. Hana had expected this reaction. During the 3-week journey to Kepler Station, the transport captain had warned her about it. Humans came from what the galactic community called a Deathworld, though most humans did not think Earth was particularly dangerous. It was just home. But to species that had evolved on safer planets with fewer predators and gentler weather, Earth sounded like a nightmare. She found an empty table near the back and sat down with her meal tray. The food was designed to be safe for all species, which meant it tasted like nothing much. As she ate, she listened to the conversations around her. Most aliens spoke Galactic Standard, the common language that all Academy cadets had to learn. Group of Altarians was discussing the upcoming training exercises. They had 4 arms each and blue skin that reminded Hana of the ocean back home. One of them was complaining about having to work with species that might not understand proper military protocol. The humans especially, said the tallest one. They come from a primitive world and have no experience with civilized warfare. Hana kept eating and pretended not to hear. She had learned during her journey that getting angry would only prove their point about humans being violent and uncontrolled. Instead, she focused on finishing her meal and reviewing what she knew about tomorrow's schedule. Combat training was first, followed by tactical analysis, and then weapons systems. She was looking forward to the combat training most of all. Her father had been in the Korean military and had taught her basic fighting techniques when she was young. Her mother had insisted she learn traditional martial arts as well. Both parents had grown up during the dangerous years before Earth joined the galactic community, when humans still had to worry about wars and conflicts between their own species. "Excuse me," said a voice behind her. Hana turned to see another human approaching. He was taller than her with dark hair and the same academy uniform. She felt relief wash over her at seeing someone from home. "You must be Lee Hana," he said in Korean. "I am Park Ji-won. I arrived yesterday on the transport from Europa Station." "Nice to meet you," Hana replied, also in Korean. It felt good to speak her native language after days of using Galactic Standard. "Are you the only other human here?" "There are 3 of us total," Ji-won said, sitting across from her. "Kim Tae-hyung is in the advanced program, so we might not see him much during basic training." They talked quietly while finishing their meals. Ji-won had grown up on one of the Mars colonies, but his parents were originally from Busan. He told her about the other species in their training group and what he had learned about academy life from the senior cadets. "Most of them think we will wash out in the first week," he said. "They believe humans are too aggressive and undisciplined for military service." "What do you think?" Hana asked. "I think they do not understand us very well," Ji-won replied. "They see our world as dangerous and assume that makes us dangerous too. But surviving on Earth requires discipline and control, not just aggression." After dinner, Hana found her assigned dormitory room. It was small but clean, with a bed, desk, and storage unit. The walls were bare metal, painted the same gray color as the corridors. A small viewing port looked out at the stars and the distant glow of the system's primary star. She unpacked her few belongings and placed the photo of her family on the desk. Her parents stood together in front of their house in Seoul, smiling, despite their worry about her leaving. Her younger brother stood between them, trying to look serious in his school uniform. A soft chime from the room's communication system interrupted her thoughts. The voice of Instructor Veltar came through the speaker, announcing lights out in 1 hour and reminding all cadets about the early start tomorrow. Veltar was an Altarian with decades of experience training cadets from across the galaxy. According to the Academy information, he had never failed a cadet who was willing to learn and work hard. Hana changed into her sleeping clothes and lay on the narrow bed. Through the thin walls, she could hear other cadets talking in their rooms. Some sounded nervous about tomorrow's training, while others seemed confident they would excel. She thought about her conversation with Jiwon and his comment about the other species not understanding humans. It was true that Earth was more dangerous than most worlds in the galactic community. Humans had evolved alongside predators that could kill them in seconds. They had survived ice ages and natural disasters that would have destroyed weaker species. Even their weather was unpredictable and sometimes deadly. But that danger had made humans careful and quick to react. When a tiger was hunting you, you learned to notice every small sound and movement. When earthquakes could happen without warning, you learned to respond instantly to any sign of trouble. When other humans might attack your tribe, you learned to read body language and prepare for violence even while hoping for peace. The Academy instructors had studied human history and biology, but Hana wondered if they truly understood what it meant to grow up on a world where everything could kill you. Did they know that human children learned to identify dangerous animals before they learned to read? Did they realize that human reflexes were designed to respond to threats that moved faster than most aliens could even see? Tomorrow would be her first real test. Combat training would show whether humans belonged in the galactic military or if they were too primitive for civilized warfare. Hana was not worried about her own abilities, but she knew that her performance would affect how people saw all humans. If she failed, it would confirm what many aliens already believed about her species. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep, but her mind kept working. In a few hours, she would face opponents who had trained their entire lives for military service. They came from proud warrior cultures with thousands of years of military tradition. Some of them were twice her size and had natural weapons like claws or armor-like skin, but they had never faced anything like a human who had grown up on Earth. They had never dealt with someone whose ancestors had survived by being faster and smarter than creatures designed by evolution to kill them. They did not know that every human carried the reflexes of a species that had fought its way to the top of the most dangerous food chain in the known galaxy. The lights dimmed automatically as the station's night cycle began. Outside her viewing port, the stars looked the same as they did from Earth. That thought comforted her as she finally drifted off to sleep, dreaming of home and preparing for the challenges that tomorrow would bring. The alarm sounded at 500 station time, dragging Hana from a deep sleep filled with dreams of running through Seoul's streets. She dressed quickly in her training uniform and joined the stream of cadets heading toward the mess hall. The corridors buzzed with nervous energy as everyone prepared for their first real test at the academy. Breakfast was the same tasteless nutrition blocks as always, but Hana forced herself to eat every bite. Her father had taught her that a warrior never knew when the next meal would come, so she should never waste food when it was available. Around her, other cadets picked at their food while discussing what they expected from combat training. Jiwon sat beside her, looking as calm as she felt. They had both grown up knowing that someday they might have to fight for their lives, so a training exercise did not seem particularly frightening. Some of the other species looked genuinely nervous, especially the ones from the peaceful garden, worlds where conflict had been eliminated centuries ago. "Have you seen the training ground?" asked a Velthari cadet at the next table. His name was something unpronounceable that sounded like clicking rocks, so everyone called him Rocky. "My cousin trained here 5 years ago and said the equipment is designed to test every species fairly." "Fair is relative," muttered a large Belthari whose scales were dark green with yellow stripes. This was Korth, one of the most vocal critics of allowing humans into the academy. "Some species have natural advantages that training cannot overcome. Hana pretended not to notice when his eyes moved in her direction. Korth stood nearly 3 meters tall and had arms like tree trunks. His species came from a high-gravity world and were known throughout the galaxy as excellent warriors. They had served in the galactic military for over 1,000 years and considered themselves the gold standard for combat troops. After breakfast, all the first-year cadets gathered in Training Ground Alpha. The space was enormous, with enough room for hundreds of beings to practice at the same time. The floor was covered in a soft material that would cushion falls without making movement difficult. Weapons racks lined the walls, holding training versions of every type of weapon used by the galactic military. Instructor Veltar stood at the center of the room, his 4 arms clasped behind his back as he waited for everyone to assemble. He was shorter than most Altarians but had the bearing of someone who had seen real combat. Scars on his blue skin told stories of battles fought long before any of the cadets had been born. "Today we begin your education in hand-to-hand combat," Veltar announced in his gravelly voice. "Every soldier must be prepared to fight without weapons when the situation demands it. You will learn to defend yourselves and subdue opponents using only your natural abilities and training." He gestured to a raised platform where 2 senior cadets waited. Both were Altarians like himself, moving with the fluid grace that their species was known for. They demonstrated basic defensive positions, showing how to block attacks and counter with submissions that would disable an opponent without causing permanent harm. "Combat in the galactic military is not about killing," Veltar continued. "We are peacekeepers, not destroyers. Your goal is always to end conflicts with minimum harm to all parties involved." The demonstration continued for nearly an hour, covering basic techniques that all species could learn regardless of their physical differences. Hana watched carefully, noting how the movements were designed for beings with different numbers of limbs and varying levels of strength. Everything was methodical and controlled, following strict protocols that had been developed over centuries. When the demonstration ended, Veltar divided the cadets into pairs for individual assessment. Each pair would demonstrate one defensive technique while he observed and provided feedback. The exercise was meant to be slow and careful, giving everyone a chance to show they understood the basic principles. The first pair consisted of 2 insectoid cadets from the hive worlds. They moved through their demonstration with mechanical precision, each movement calculated and deliberate. Their natural coordination gave them an advantage, but they followed the prescribed techniques exactly as shown. Veltar nodded approvingly and made notes on his tablet. Next came a pair of Velthari, the rock-like beings whose heavy bodies made them naturally stable. They struggled with some of the quicker movements, but showed good understanding of leverage and balance. Their demonstration took nearly twice as long as the insects, but Veltar seemed satisfied with their effort. Hana noticed that all the demonstrations were taking much longer than she expected. The aliens moved carefully and deliberately, thinking through each step before acting. Even their fastest movements seemed sluggish compared to what she considered normal speed. She began to understand why her father had always emphasized the importance of quick reactions during their training sessions back on Earth. A pair of tentacled beings from the water worlds took their turn next. Their flexible bodies allowed them to flow around attacks in ways that rigid-bodied species could not match. But they still moved at what Hana thought of as underwater speed. Everything they did seemed to happen in slow motion. Korth was paired with another Belthari for his demonstration. The 2 large reptilians moved with surprising grace for their size, but even their combat-focused species seemed to prioritize form over speed. They completed their techniques correctly but took several seconds to execute movements that Hana knew she could perform in fractions of that time. "Adequate," Veltar pronounced when they finished. "Your species' natural strength gives you advantages, but remember that overwhelming force is not always the best solution." More pairs took their turns, each demonstrating the same basic defensive sequence. The pattern became clear to Hana as she watched. Every species approached combat as an intellectual exercise, something to be planned and executed with careful thought. Even the ones with natural weapons like claws or stinger moved deliberately, making sure each action was precise and controlled. Finally, Veltar called her name. "Cadet Lee Hana, you will demonstrate with trainee Korth." A murmur went through the assembled cadets. Pairing the smallest cadet with one of the largest seemed like poor judgment, but Hana walked calmly to the center of the training area. Korth followed, his heavy footsteps echoing in the suddenly quiet room. "This will be a simple defensive demonstration," Veltar announced. "Trainee Korth will attempt a basic grab, and Cadet Hana will respond with the defensive technique we have been practicing." Korth looked down at her with what might have been amusement. At nearly 3 meters tall, he towered over her like a building. His scaled arms were thicker than her waist, and his clawed hands could probably crush bones without effort. To him, this was probably going to be the easiest demonstration of the day. "Try not to hurt the little Deathworlder," called out one of his friends, which caused laughter among the other Belthari cadets. Hana ignored the comment and took her position. The defensive stance felt natural to her, though she noted that the academy version was more formal than what her father had taught her. In real combat, there would be no time for perfect positioning or textbook form. Veltar raised one of his 4 hands to signal the start of the exercise. "Remember, this is a controlled demonstration. Proceed at training speed with full safety protocols." Korth nodded and prepared to reach for her shoulder in the standard grab that all the previous pairs had demonstrated. His movements were fluid and controlled, following the exact pattern that Veltar had shown them. To him, this was just another routine training exercise with a predictable outcome. But as his hand moved toward her shoulder, Hana felt something that the other cadets probably could not understand. Every instinct that had kept her ancestors alive on the most dangerous planet in the galaxy suddenly activated. Her nervous system, designed by millions of years of evolution to react to threats that could kill in milliseconds, processed the approaching grab as exactly what it was meant to simulate in real combat: an attack. The training ground fell completely silent as Veltar prepared to give the command to begin. Every cadet watched the strange pairing of the massive reptilian warrior and the tiny human girl. Most expected to see a demonstration of why size and strength mattered in combat. They were about to learn something very different about what it meant to come from a death world where everything could kill you. Korth moved his massive arm toward Hana's shoulder with what he considered appropriate speed for a training exercise. In his mind, this was a simple demonstration that would show the proper technique while proving that size and strength still mattered in combat. The human girl would struggle against his grip, demonstrate the defensive move they had all learned, and then he would release her according to protocol. The movement took him exactly 1.3 seconds from start to finish, which was considered quite fast for a controlled training demonstration. Most Belthari would have needed nearly 2 seconds to complete the same motion while maintaining proper form. Korth felt confident that his natural warrior instincts were serving him well. For Hana, watching that arm approach felt like watching a falling tree in slow motion. Every detail became crystal clear as her nervous system shifted into the hyper-alert state that had kept humans alive for millions of years. She could see the individual scales on Korth's arm, count the joints in his fingers, and predict exactly where his grip would land based on the angle of his approach. Time seemed to stretch as her brain processed information at speeds that most galactic species would find impossible to imagine. This was not just training for her nervous system. It was a real threat that required immediate response. The fact that it was happening in a controlled environment made no difference to reflexes that had been shaped by predators who did not follow safety protocols. Veltar began to draw breath to announce the start of the demonstration, but his respiratory system moved at normal Altarian speed. His lungs expanded slowly as air flowed through his breathing passages at the steady rate that worked perfectly for his species. Under normal circumstances, he would have spoken the word "begin" before Korth's hand reached Hana's shoulder, but circumstances were no longer normal. Hana moved. Her right hand snapped up to intercept Korth's wrist at the exact moment his grip would have closed on her shoulder. The movement was not the careful, deliberate block that the training manual described. Instead, it was a lightning-fast strike that targeted the specific nerve cluster her father had shown her when she was 12 years old. The impact sent a shockwave through Korth's nervous system that temporarily disrupted his muscle control. His massive hand, which had been closing with enough force to crush human bones, suddenly went limp as the signals from his brain were interrupted by the precise strike to his radial nerve. Before Korth could even process what had happened to his arm, Hana was already moving again. Her left foot swept behind his right ankle while her shoulder drove into his hip at exactly the right angle to destroy his balance. Physics took over as his 3-meter frame began to topple like a felled tree. Most beings would have panicked at this point, flailing wildly as they fell toward the training mat. But Korth was a trained Belthari warrior with excellent instincts, so he tried to twist his body to absorb the fall safely. Under normal circumstances, his natural agility and strength would have allowed him to recover from such a takedown. Hana did not allow normal circumstances. As Korth's body rotated through the air, she moved with him like a dancer following music that only she could hear. Her hands found pressure points that her mother had taught her during traditional martial arts practice, applying just enough force to disrupt his attempts at recovery without causing permanent damage. By the time Korth hit the training mat, Hana was already positioned beside him with her knee against his neck, and her hands controlling both of his arms in a submission hold that would render him completely helpless if he tried to resist. The entire sequence from initial contact to final control had taken exactly 0.4 seconds. Veltar's breath was still entering his lungs when Korth found himself flat on his back, with a human girl half his size holding him in a position where any movement would only tighten her control. The instructor's eyes widened in shock as his brain tried to process what had just occurred. The silence in the training ground was absolute. Over 100 cadets from dozens of different species stared at the impossible scene before them. The mighty Belthari warrior, pride of a culture that had dominated galactic combat sports for centuries, lay motionless under the control of someone who barely reached his chest when standing. Korth's yellow eyes rolled upward to look at Hana's face above him. He expected to see triumph or satisfaction, but instead found only calm professionalism. She was not gloating or celebrating her victory, merely maintaining control until the exercise was officially ended. Her breathing was not even elevated despite having just performed what seemed like an impossible feat. "I yield," Korth whispered, his voice barely audible in the shocked silence. Hana immediately released her holds and stepped back, offering her hand to help him stand. The gesture was purely automatic, born from years of training with her father who had always emphasized respect for opponents. Korth stared at the offered hand for a moment before accepting the help, his massive frame dwarfing hers even more dramatically as they stood together. Veltar finally completed his inhalation, and the word "begin" emerged from his throat, though it now seemed absurdly late and irrelevant. His forearms hung at his sides as he tried to understand what he had witnessed. In 30 years of training cadets from across the galaxy, he had never seen anything that approached what the human girl had just demonstrated. The instructor's tablet contained detailed records of every species' average reaction times, movement speeds, and combat capabilities. Humans were listed as having above-average reflexes due to their Deathworld origins, but the numbers in the database seemed completely inadequate to explain what had just occurred. According to his instruments, the entire encounter had lasted less than half a second. In that time, Hana had neutralized a threat, controlled a much larger opponent, and positioned herself for either further combat or immediate withdrawal. Most species would have needed several seconds just to recognize that an attack was occurring. Rocky, the Belthari cadet who had seemed so confident at breakfast, spoke first. "What just happened?" he asked in a voice that sounded like grinding stone. "The human moved before the exercise began," complained one of Korth's friends. "That was cheating." But Jiwan stepped forward with a slight smile on his face. He had grown up on Mars where the gravity was higher than Earth normal, but his parents had made sure he understood his heritage. "She moved when the attack started," he said quietly. "The command to begin was just a formality." More voices joined the discussion as cadets tried to make sense of what they had witnessed. Some accused Hana of breaking protocol while others argued that she had simply responded to a genuine threat with appropriate force. The Belthari cadets seemed particularly upset that their champion had been defeated so easily. Veltar raised all 4 arms for silence. When the room quieted, he looked directly at Hana with an expression that mixed respect with curiosity. "Cadet Lee Hana, Please explain what occurred during that demonstration. Hana straightened to attention, though her relaxed posture suggested she was still ready to move instantly if necessary. Sir, Trainee Korth initiated a grab that my nervous system interpreted as an attack. I responded with appropriate defensive measures to neutralize the threat and establish control. The exercise had not yet begun, Veltar pointed out. With respect, sir, my reflexes do not wait for permission, Hana replied. When something moves to grab me, I react. That is how my species survived on our homeworld. Korth rubbed his wrist where she had struck the nerve cluster, his expression thoughtful rather than angry. I have trained in combat since I was hatched, he said slowly. I have faced opponents from a dozen different species and won tournaments across 3 sectors, but I never saw her coming. He looked around at his fellow cadets, his yellow eyes reflecting a new understanding. She moved like lightning. No, faster than lightning. Like she knew what I was going to do before I did it. Deathworld reflexes, whispered one of the insectoid cadets, her compound eyes glittering with something that might have been fear or admiration. I have read about this but never seen it demonstrated. Veltar made several notes on his tablet, his movements careful and deliberate. The training database would need significant updates after today's demonstration. More importantly, he was beginning to understand that everything he thought he knew about human combat capabilities was probably wrong. The exercise is concluded, he announced. All cadets will report to tactical analysis in 30 minutes. Cadet Hana and Trainee Korth, please remain behind for additional consultation. As the other cadets filed out of the training ground, their voices rose in excited discussion about what they had witnessed. Hana remained at attention, waiting to hear what consequences her actions might bring. She had not intended to cause such a dramatic scene, but she also could not apologize for responding the way her evolution had designed her to respond. The medical bay's scanning equipment hummed softly as Medic Yelana examined Korth with her delicate tentacles. The Velnari medical officer had seen thousands of training injuries during her years at the academy, but this case was unusual. The massive Belthari showed no signs of actual damage despite having been completely defeated by someone a third his size. Fascinating, Yelana murmured as she reviewed the scan results. Your nervous system shows temporary disruption, consistent with precise pressure point manipulation. But there is no tissue damage or permanent impairment. Whoever did this possessed extremely detailed knowledge of Belthari anatomy. Korth flexed, his fingers testing the sensation that was slowly returning to his hand. She struck one point on my wrist and my entire arm went dead. How is that possible? Many species have vulnerable nerve clusters, the medic explained. But successfully targeting them during combat requires split-second timing and perfect accuracy. Most beings cannot achieve that level of precision while under stress. Through the medical bay's transparent wall, Korth could see other cadets walking past in the corridor. Many of them stared at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to pity. Word of his defeat had spread throughout the academy faster than he would have thought possible. Some looked disappointed that their champion had fallen, while others seemed excited by the unexpected demonstration of human capabilities. The human girl did not seem stressed at all, Korth said thoughtfully. She moved like she had done this 1,000 times before. Yelana's tentacles rippled in what her species considered a nod. Perhaps she has. The reports from Earth suggest that their young begin combat training very early, not formal military instruction, but survival skills that prepare them for their dangerous environment. Meanwhile, in Administrator Zethrak's office 3 levels above the medical bay, Veltar was explaining the morning's events to his superior. The insectoid administrator's compound eyes reflected the light from multiple screens, showing security footage of the training demonstration played at various speeds. Watch carefully, Veltar said, manipulating the controls to slow the recording even further. At normal speed, it appears that Cadet Hana moved before the exercise began. But when we examine the precise timing, we can see that Trainee Korth's grab was already in motion when she responded. Zethrak's mandibles clicked as he processed the information. Her reaction time appears to be nearly instantaneous. Our database shows the fastest recorded response among galactic species at 0.12 seconds. This human achieved 0.04 seconds from stimulus to action, and that may not even represent her maximum capability, Veltar added. She was clearly holding back to avoid causing serious injury. A full-power response might have been even faster. The administrator accessed another file, scrolling through pages of data about human physiology and evolutionary history. Earth, classification, Deathworld, Class 7. Average life expectancy before technological advancement. 25 standard years due to environmental hazards, predation, and intraspecies conflict. Primary survival adaptations, enhanced reflexes, pattern recognition, and stress response. The file classifications do not adequately convey the reality, Veltar said. I have trained cadets from warrior cultures across the galaxy, but nothing prepared me for what I witnessed today. Zethrak leaned back in his chair, his insectoid features unreadable. The question now is whether this represents a typical human capability, or if Cadet Hana is exceptionally gifted, even by her species standards. Before Veltar could respond, the office door chimed. Kim Tae-hyung entered at the administrator's invitation, his advanced cadet uniform indicating his senior status. Unlike the other humans, he had been at the academy for over a year and had proven himself in multiple training programs. You requested to see me, sir? Tae-hyung asked, maintaining proper military bearing. We need your assessment of this morning's incident, Zethrak explained, activating the security footage. Is Cadet Hana's performance representative of standard human capabilities? Tae-hyung watched the recording with interest, though his expression suggested he was not particularly surprised by what he saw. Hana is well-trained, but not exceptionally so by Earth standards. Most humans from military families would be capable of similar responses. Similar responses, Veltar repeated. She defeated a Belthari warrior in less than half a second. Korth is large and strong, but he telegraphed his intentions clearly, Tae-hyung observed. Any human with basic training would have seen that, grab coming from several meters away. The real question is why no one warned him about human reaction speeds. Zethrak pulled up another file, this one containing the Academy's integration protocols for new species. The orientation materials mention enhanced reflexes, but do not emphasize the degree of enhancement. Perhaps we need to revise our approach. With respect, sir, the problem is not our materials, Tae-hyung said carefully. Most galactic species have no frame of reference for understanding what enhanced reflexes mean in practical terms. They hear the words but cannot grasp the reality until they experience it directly. Back in the cadet quarters, Hana sat on her narrow bed while Jiwon paced around the small room. Other cadets had been stopping by all afternoon, some wanting to congratulate her while others seemed to be studying her like a dangerous animal in a zoo. Half the academy thinks you are some kind of super soldier, Jiwon said. The other half thinks you cheated somehow. I just reacted normally, Hana replied. If Korth had been a real threat, I would have done the same thing. That is exactly what scares them. To most species, combat is something you prepare for and think about. But you treated it like breathing or blinking, something that just happens automatically. A soft knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Hana opened it to find Korth standing in the corridor, looking uncomfortable but determined. His massive frame filled the doorway as he struggled to find the right words. May I speak with you? He asked. Hana stepped aside to let him enter, though the room became very crowded with 3 beings in it. Korth had to duck slightly to avoid hitting his head on the ceiling, making him seem even larger than usual. I came to apologize, he said, simply. My friends and I have been saying things about humans that were not fair or accurate. We assumed that coming from a dangerous world made you dangerous, but we did not understand what that really meant. You do not need to apologize, Hana replied. You were not wrong about humans being dangerous, we are. But not in the way you thought. Korth nodded slowly. I have been thinking about what happened during the demonstration. You could have seriously injured me, but you chose not to. That level of control while moving at such speed requires incredible discipline. My father taught me that true strength is knowing when not to use your full power, Hana said. Anyone can cause damage, It takes skill to end a fight without permanently harming your opponent. Would you be willing to teach me? Korth asked suddenly. Not your specific techniques, but the principles behind them. I want to understand how you think about combat. Jiwon looked surprised by the request, but Hana smiled. I would be honored. But you should know that learning to fight like a human means learning to think like prey that became a predator. It is not easy for species that evolved as natural hunters. I am willing to learn, Korth said firmly. Today showed me that there is much about combat that I do not understand. Over the following days, word of the demonstration spread throughout the academy and beyond. Instructors began reviewing their training protocols while senior cadets debated the implications of having humans in their ranks. Some called for separate training programs, arguing that human capabilities were too different to integrate safely with other species. Others suggested that this was exactly why humans belonged in the galactic military. If Earth's dangerous environment had produced beings with such remarkable survival instincts, perhaps those instincts could benefit the entire alliance. Veltar found himself fielding questions from instructors throughout the academy. Everyone wanted to know if other humans would perform similarly, and how training protocols should be adjusted to account for their unique capabilities. The real issue, he explained during a staff meeting, is that we have been thinking about combat from the perspective of species that evolved on safe worlds. But humans evolved on a world where everything could kill them, so they developed completely different approaches to survival and conflict. The meeting room fell silent as the implications sank in. If humans truly represented a fundamentally different way of thinking about combat, then integrating them into the galactic military would require more than just adjusting a few training exercises. In her quarters that evening, Hana received a message from her parents back on Earth. News of the demonstration had somehow reached them, though the details were probably exaggerated by the time the story traveled across interstellar communication networks. Her father's message was brief. Remember that you represent not just yourself, but all of humanity. Show them our strength, but also show them our honor. Her mother added, We are proud of you, but be careful. Not everyone will appreciate discovering that they are not as strong as they believed. Hana saved the messages and prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges. The demonstration had changed how 3 weeks after the demonstration that had changed everything at the academy, Hana stood in training ground beta watching mixed species combat teams practice new techniques. The room buzzed with activity as cadets who had once avoided each other now worked together in carefully balanced groups. Veltar had spent those weeks completely restructuring the combat training program. Instead of treating all species identically, the new approach acknowledged that different evolutionary backgrounds had created fundamentally different approaches to conflict. Humans were no longer expected to slow down to match other species, and other species were no longer expected to keep up with human reflexes. Remember, Veltar called out to the practicing teams, the goal is not to become identical fighters, but to understand how your natural abilities complement each other. Hana watched as Korth worked with a team that included Rocky the Velthari and 2 insectoid cadets from the Hive worlds. The massive Belthari had spent hours learning to read the subtle body language cues that humans use to predict attacks before they fully developed. While he would never match human reaction speeds, he had become much better at positioning himself to avoid situations where lightning-fast responses were necessary. Your people's gift is not just speed, Korth had told her during one of their training sessions. It is the ability to see patterns that others miss. You read intentions in ways that seem almost magical to species that evolved as apex predators. The comment had sparked an interesting discussion with Veltar about human pattern recognition. Humans had not evolved as natural predators like the Belthari or the insectoid hive species. Instead, they had developed as persistence hunters who succeeded by outlasting their prey and avoiding the many predators that could kill them easily. This required different skills than pure strength or speed. Humans excel at reading complex social and environmental patterns because they had to, Veltar had explained to the other instructors. A species that survived by cooperation and careful observation of threats developed very different instincts than species that survived through individual prowess. The changes at the academy went beyond just combat training. Tactical analysis classes now included human perspectives on long-term planning and risk assessment. Weapons systems courses incorporated human approaches to improvisation and adaptation. Even basic military protocol had been adjusted to account for human social structures and decision-making processes. Not everyone had been happy with these changes. Some of the more traditional species complained that the academy was lowering its standards to accommodate primitive newcomers. A few senior cadets had requested transfers rather than adapt to new training methods, but the results spoke for themselves. Mixed teams that included humans consistently outperformed homogeneous groups in complex scenarios. The humans' ability to spot patterns and react quickly complemented the specialized strengths of other species in ways that surprised everyone. Choi Minho, the third human in their class, had become particularly skilled at bridging the gap between human and alien thinking. His calm personality and diplomatic nature made him ideal for explaining human concepts to species that found them confusing or threatening. The key is helping them understand that being different does not mean being superior or inferior, Minho had told Hana and Jiwon during one of their study sessions. Humans have advantages in some areas and disadvantages in others, just like every species. Today marked the end of the integration period and the beginning of advanced training for cadets who had successfully adapted to the new mixed species approach. Hana felt nervous as she prepared for the evaluation that would determine whether she could continue at the academy or would be transferred to a specialized human-only program. The evaluation took place in the main auditorium, with senior staff, observing as teams demonstrated their ability to work together under pressure. Each team faced a series of scenarios designed to test not just individual skills, but group coordination and mutual support. Hana's team included Korth, Rocky, and 2 cadets she had not worked with before. A tentacled being named Yala from the Aesir, water worlds, and a flying insectoid called Zix, whose species name was unpronounceable to human vocal cords. On paper, the group seemed randomly assembled, but weeks of training had taught them to use their different abilities as strengths rather than limitations. Their first scenario involved rescuing hostages from a complex facility while avoiding detection. The traditional approach would have been to plan carefully, move slowly, and rely on overwhelming force if discovered. But their mixed team had developed a different strategy. Zix scouted ahead using her natural flight capability and compound eyes that could see in multiple spectrums. Yala used her flexible body to access areas that would be impossible for rigid-limbed species. Rocky provided mobile cover with his rock-like durability. Korth served as the heavy assault option if stealth failed, and Hana coordinated everything, her human pattern recognition, allowing her to process information from all team members and adjust their plan in real time as new factors emerged. When they encountered an unexpected security patrol, her instant reaction time allowed her to signal the team to freeze before they were detected. The rescue was completed in record time with 0 casualties and no alerts triggered. More importantly, every team member had contributed meaningfully to the success. This was what the new training program was designed to achieve: true cooperation between species rather than simple coexistence. Their second scenario tested combat, coordination against multiple opponents. Here, Hana's speed became crucial as she darted between enemies, disrupting their formations while her teammates used their own strengths to capitalize on the confusion she created. Korth's raw power, guided by the tactical awareness he had learned from studying human approaches, proved devastating against opponents who expected traditional Belthari charges. The final scenario was the most challenging, a diplomatic situation, where they had to negotiate with hostile parties while being ready for combat if talks failed. This required not just individual skills but deep understanding of how their different species' approaches to conflict resolution could be combined effectively. Yala took the lead in negotiations, her species' natural empathy making her ideal for reading the emotional states of the hostile parties. Hana remained alert for any signs of impending violence, ready to react instantly if the situation deteriorated. The others positioned themselves to provide maximum tactical advantage while maintaining non-threatening postures. When the negotiations succeeded without violence, Administrator Zethrak made detailed notes on his evaluation tablet. The scenarios had demonstrated something that the Academy's founders had hoped for, but never quite achieved. True integration where species differences became advantages rather than obstacles. Impressive, Veltar commented as the teams reassembled for final evaluation. I have observed mixed species cooperation for decades, but what we have seen today represents a new level of coordination. The results were announced that evening in the Academy's main hall. Of the 37 cadets who had entered the integration program, 31 had qualified for advanced training. More importantly, the success rate for mixed teams was significantly higher than for single-species groups, suggesting that diversity truly was a strength when properly managed. Hana felt relief wash over her as her name was called among those advancing to the next phase of Academy training. But the real satisfaction came from seeing Korth's name on the same list. The proud Belthari warrior had overcome his initial prejudices and learned to value cooperation over individual dominance. After the ceremony, cadets gathered in the common areas to celebrate or commiserate depending on their results. The atmosphere was different from Hana's first day at the Academy. Instead of species clustering in separate groups, the room was filled with mixed conversations where beings who had once avoided each other now shared experiences and planned future collaborations. You know, Rocky said as he joined Hana's group, near the viewing ports. When I first arrived here, I thought the Academy's mission was to turn us all into identical soldiers. But now I understand that our strength comes from being different. Korth nodded, his yellow eyes reflecting the starlight. From outside, my species has a saying, the mountain that stands alone falls to the wind, but the forest that grows together weathers any storm. I never understood what it meant until I learned to fight alongside humans. Jiwan raised his cup of synthetic juice in a toast. To understanding differences instead of fearing them. To finding strength in diversity, Minho added. To proving that cooperation is more powerful than competition, Yala contributed, her musical voice adding harmony to the moment. As they drank their toast, Hana looked around the room at the mixed groups of cadets who were planning their futures together. The Academy had changed dramatically since her arrival, but the change went both ways. Humans had adapted to galactic military culture while also influencing it in positive ways. 3 months later, at the graduation ceremony for advanced tactical training, Hana stood with her mixed species team as they received commendations for excellence in cooperative combat operations. The ceremony was attended by Military Office Very One at the Academy, SE,